I'll be reading from the January 22nd, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: justices signaled that the Supreme Court will likely allow Fed board member Lisa Cook to remain in the job, while her legal challenge to her dismissal proceeds in the lower courts. The S&P 500, Dow, and NASDAQ all rose 1.2% after Trump said he and NATO had agreed on a framework for a deal on Greenland. The number of homes going under contract in the U.S. slipped in December, according to a National Association of Realtors index. NVIDIA Chief Executive Jensen Huang said artificial intelligence is already bringing economic benefits and needed more investment. The gulf between senior executives and workers' experience with generative AI is vast, a survey of 5,000 white-collar workers found. For the first time since the start of the private credit boom, large numbers of individual investors are trying to get their money out. Johnson & Johnson reported higher quarterly revenue and profit on the back of growth in sales of drugs for cancer and autoimmune conditions. Amazon is launching the largest retail store in its history, planning a property of about 230,000 square feet in the Chicago suburbs. Charles Schwab reported a 34% increase in quarterly profit after trading, and net interest revenue climbed. Dos Equis Marketing brought back the original Most Interesting Man in the World 10 years after the title went to a younger actor. Smithfield Foods agreed to acquire hot dog brand Nathan's Famous for $102 a share in a deal with an enterprise value of $450 million. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. Trump backed away from threats associated with Greenland and said he had formed a framework for a deal on the future of the world's largest island. After pulling back from strikes on Iran last week, Trump is still pressing aides for decisive military options, the U.S. officials said. The Trump administration is asserting new powers to forcibly enter the homes of immigrants they hope to arrest without a criminal warrant signed by a judge. A GOP-led House panel voted to find former President Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton in contempt of Congress for refusing to appear for depositions on Epstein. A former Uvalde School District police officer charged for his role in the bungled response to the 2022 mass shooting at Robb Elementary School was acquitted by a Texas jury. Trump accelerated his effort to ban institutional investors from buying single-family homes, laying out new steps to stop those purchases. 3 East Coast wind projects scored court victories over Trump administration attempts to shut them down last week, but government opposition to offshore turbines could hamper any industry plans for building new ones. The Trump administration dropped its appeal of a federal court ruling that blocked a campaign against diversity, equity, and inclusion, threatening federal funding to the nation's schools and colleges. The Qatari donated plane being overhauled to become a new Air Force One jet is on track to be delivered to Trump this summer, according to the Air Force. A man who admitted assassinating Japan's former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was sentenced to life in prison. Israeli forces killed at least 11 Palestinians in Gaza, including 3 journalists, hospitals in the enclave said. The picture on today's front page shows President Trump speaking and standing at a podium, and in the background is a blue covering with white letters saying World Economic Forum. The caption: President Trump spoke Wednesday in Davos, Switzerland, delivering strident criticisms of U.S. allies in Europe. The article, Trump, with deal in sight, backs off Greenland threats. President rules out using force to take island and cancels tariffs on Europe. By Alex Leary, Daniel Michaels, Bertrand Benoit, and Robbie Kramer. Davos, Switzerland. President Trump said Wednesday that he wouldn't deploy the military to take control of Greenland and called off promised tariffs on European nations, a head-spinning U-turn, as he said he formed the framework of a future deal regarding the world's largest island. The about-face followed days of back-channel conversations between Trump, his advisors, and European leaders, including North Atlantic Treaty Organization Secretary General Mark Rutte and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, according to people close to the talks. The Europeans, who stood united in their opposition to Trump acquiring Greenland, employed a mix of enticements such as offers to boost Arctic security and warnings, including about the dangers to the U.S. of a deeper rupture in NATO. After a meeting with Rutte on Wednesday, Trump called off promised tariffs on European nations. The exact contours of the deal framework are still in flux, but negotiations are expected to center on several areas, according to officials in Europe familiar with the discussions. They include a potential U.S. agreement with Denmark about stationing forces at bases in Greenland and expanded European efforts to boost security around the Arctic. The U.S. could receive a right of first refusal on investments in Greenland's mineral resources, a veto aimed at preventing Russia and China from tapping the island's wealth, and in exchange, Trump would take tariff threats off the table, the officials said. The White House declined to comment on the details of the proposed framework, and a Trump administration official said the scope of the negotiations hadn't been set in stone. If this deal goes through, and President Trump is very hopeful it will, the United States will be achieving all of its strategic goals with respect to Greenland at very little cost forever, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said. Other articles from the front page follow. Justices likely to let Cook keep Fed job. Court signals unease about president's bid to fire official and gain more control. By James Romister and Nick Timiraeus, Washington. Supreme Court justices across the ideological spectrum expressed deep unease on Wednesday about President Trump's attempt to fire a member of the Federal Reserve, with several stressing the importance of a central bank insulated from political pressure. Their comments during the nearly 2 hours of oral arguments signaled that the court will likely allow Fed board member Lisa Cook to remain in the job while her legal challenge to her dismissal proceeds in the lower courts. Justice Brett Kavanaugh, a Trump appointee, highlighted the long history and economic impetus of shielding monetary policy from White House control. The Trump administration's claims of broad and unreviewable firing authority would weaken, if not shatter, the independence of the Federal Reserve, Kavanaugh warned. And he cautioned that such a broad power would pass to other presidents, allowing a future Democrat to dismiss anyone Trump appoints to the Fed during the remainder of his term. Investors hit the exits of private credit funds by Matt Wurz. For the first time since the start of the private credit boom, large numbers of individual investors are trying to get their money out. Several of the biggest funds eligible to wealthy individuals received requests from about 5% of shareholders to cash out at the end of last year, well above the normal volume, according to SEC filings. One, managed by Blue Owl, got redemptions for about 15% of its shares, primarily from Asian clients, a person familiar with the matter said. The rising redemptions come at an awkward time for the private credit fund managers and for the Trump administration, as they push for new rules that would democratize private markets by encouraging their inclusion in 401k retirement plans for all Americans. Private fund managers, including Apollo Global Management, Blackstone, and Blue Owl, blame fear-mongering about a recent spate of corporate bankruptcies, like automotive supplier First Brands, for the surge of withdrawals. Analysts said there could be a simpler explanation. Individual investors are falling into a familiar pattern of selling out when an asset class underperforms expectations. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Musk race for SpaceX IPO tied to orbiting AI data centers by Corey Drybush, Emily Glazer, and Micah Maidenberg. SpaceX resisted going public for years. Then came the rise of artificial intelligence. Elon Musk's rocket maker became one of the country's most valuable private companies, due in part to its ability to develop risky space businesses outside the scrutiny of public investors. Its executives like to say the company wouldn't IPO until its rockets were regularly flying to Mars. That was before the rush to build data centers for AI computing prompted Musk, Jeff Bezos, and others to propose putting them in space. The idea has prompted skepticism from many engineers, given the technical challenges posed by building solar-powered AI data centers that zip around Earth. But it has continued to gain traction, and Musk has become obsessed with the idea of SpaceX being the first to do it. People familiar with the matter said. Such a feat would be hard to attempt without the billions of dollars in capital an initial public offering could deliver in one fell swoop. The billionaire also sees a SpaceX IPO as a way to help his AI company, xAI, catch up to rivals, some of the people said. Musk has a long-running rivalry with OpenAI chief executive Sam Altman, who last year explored buying a rocket company to deploy satellites with AI computing capabilities into space. Two of xAI's competitors, OpenAI and Anthropic, are eyeing their own IPOs this year, and Musk seems eager for SpaceX to hit the public market first, some of the people said. Hot-selling Chinese EVs head to global reign. U.S., European Union, and Mexico try to quash accelerating demand. By Stephen Wilmot and Santiago Perez. Julian Scott Smith was window shopping at a Porsche dealership with his wife in London's fancy Mayfair district before Christmas, sizing up the SUVs. Then the couple peeked into another dealership around the corner. We were thinking of treating ourselves to one of the German brands, but these Chinese cars look fantastic, said Scott Smith, eyeing a $60,000 BYD Sea Lion 7. Not long ago, few would buy the idea that a Chinese electric vehicle maker such as BYD could sweep European buyers off their feet, competing against Volkswagen, Toyota, and even such luxury brands as BMW and Porsche. Yet, BYD is leading a pack of Chinese automakers whose global export onslaught has surpassed even bullish expectations. The Shenzhen-based automaker delivered more than 1 million vehicles outside China in 2025, the company said, more than double the previous year's total. China surpassed Japan in 2023 as the world's #1 auto exporter. Chinese brands hold a roughly 7% share of Western Europe's total auto market, selling more than 500,000 units in the first 3 quarters of 2025, according to data provider Schmidt Automotive Research. European market leader Volkswagen, which owns Porsche and Audi, has already had its lunch eaten by local brands in China, which was once estimated to account for more than half of the German company's global profit. Now, China is coming for VW on its home turf. VW said it had confidence in our products and our ability to innovate. Politics, not market forces, have been the biggest obstacle to China's automakers. New Hampshire lawmakers are tired of getting paid like it's 1889. Members of America's largest state legislature fight for a raise. $100 a year is just ludicrous. By Scott Calvert. Think you're overdue for a raise? Try being a New Hampshire state legislator. Their pay has been frozen at the equivalent of $100 a year ever since Flinty voters etched it into the state constitution back in 1889, that is. Small wonder Granite state lawmakers are the lowest paid in the U.S. Their counterparts in most states have salaries, and the average was $47,900 last year. The National Conference of State Legislatures says Massachusetts lawmakers with an $82,000 salary pull in over $100 by lunch. New York is number one at $142,000. Let's face it, $100 a year is just ludicrous, says New Hampshire House Speaker Sherman Packard, a Republican who presides over the 400-member body, the fourth largest in the English-speaking world. Many past bids to boost pay by amending the Constitution failed. Now there is a bipartisan push to delete the pay language from the foundational document. If it succeeds, legislators could debate the issue and just maybe vote themselves a raise. Now for other articles within the paper. Trump seeks decisive options for Iran. The U.S. held off on strikes but is moving an aircraft carrier, jet fighters, to the region. By Alexander Ward, Michael R. Gordon, and Shelby Holliday. Washington. After pulling back from strikes on Iran last week, President Trump is still pressing aides for what he terms decisive military options, U.S. officials said, as Iran appears to have tightened its control of the country and targets protesters through a crackdown that has killed thousands. The U.S. is sending an aircraft carrier and jet fighters to the Middle East. Those deployments might be the start of a wider buildup that would give Trump the firepower to strike Iran should he choose to use them. Trump repeatedly has used the words decisive when describing what effect he would like any U.S. action to have on Iran, officials said. That phrasing has spurred aides at the Pentagon and White House to refine options, including some that would oust the regime. Officials also are devising more modest options, which could include targeting Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps facilities. Trump hasn't ordered strikes, and what he will do remains unclear, officials said. But the continued discussions show Trump hasn't ruled out punishing Tehran for killing protesters in the midst of Iran's spiraling economy. Death toll estimates vary. Mike Waltz, the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, on Saturday cited the Global Institution's assessment that Iran has killed up to 18,000 people. On Wednesday, Iranian state TV issued the first official death toll, saying 3,117 people were killed, the Associated Press reported. Asked on Tuesday about whether the U.S. would strike Iran, Trump noted that the regime heeded Washington's warnings and canceled plans to hang 837 people last week. We're just going to have to see what happens. The larger question for the administration, former officials and experts said, is whether a foreign regime can be dislodged through U.S. air power alone. The White House also must grapple with whether the administration is prepared to carry out a sustained military campaign that might last weeks or months should protesters in Iran again take to the streets and appeal to Trump for protection. From World Watch, Japan. Ex-premier's killer gets life in prison. A court sentenced a man who admitted to assassinating former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to life imprisonment on Wednesday. Tetsuya Yamagami, 45, earlier admitted to killing Abe in July 2022 as the former prime minister was giving a campaign speech in the western city of Nara. Abe, one of Japan's most influential politicians, was serving as a regular lawmaker when he was killed in 2022 while campaigning in the western city of Nara. Yamagami told investigators he was motivated by a desire to expose Japanese politicians' ties to the Unification Church, which he blamed for encouraging his mother to neglect him during a difficult childhood. Yamagami pleaded guilty to murder in the trial that started in October. South Korea. Former premier jailed for 23 years. A South Korean court ruled on Wednesday that the ill-fated imposition of martial law by the then-President Yoon Suk-yeol constituted an act of rebellion as it sentenced his prime minister to 23 years in prison for his involvement. Ex-Prime Minister Han Duck-soon became the first Yoon administration officials convicted of rebellion charges in relation to the martial law imposition in December 2024. The verdict is expected to set the stage for rulings involving Yoon and other associates who face rebellion charges. Han, who was appointed by Yoon, served as one of the three caretakers leaders during the crisis that led to Yoon's impeachment and removal from office. The Seoul Central District Court is to rule on Yoon's rebellion charges on February 19th. Gaza Strip. Israeli forces kill teens journalist. Israeli forces on Wednesday killed at least 11 Palestinians in Gaza, including two 13-year-old boys, 3 journalists, and a woman, hospitals in the war-battered enclave said. It was one of the deadliest days in Gaza since the ceasefire between Hamas and Israel took effect in October, and comes as the U.S. is trying to push the deal forward and implement its challenging second phase. The dead also included 3 Palestinian journalists who were killed while filming near a displacement camp in central Gaza, a camp official said. The Israeli military said the strike came after it spotted suspects who were operating a drone that posed a threat to its troops. The 2 boys were killed in separate incidents. Ex-school official acquitted in Uvalde shooting response. He faced criminal charges over failure to protect children, teachers in massacre. By Elizabeth Findell and Mariah Timms. The former Uvalde School District police officer charged for his role in the bungled response to the 2022 mass shooting at Robb Elementary School was acquitted by a Texas jury on Wednesday. Prosecutors had charged Adrian Gonzalez with child endangerment, arguing he didn't act quickly enough as the first officer to arrive on scene at the school as the gunman fired shots and ran into the building. The verdict followed a 2-week trial in Corpus Christi that sought to break new legal ground by testing whether officers can be liable for failing to protect people while on the job. The carnage in Uvalde was widely viewed as widespread law enforcement failure. More than 370 officers from nearly 24 agencies waited for more than an hour to intervene as the shooter killed 19 fourth graders and 2 teachers. Ultimately, a Border Patrol technician team killed the gunman. Gonzalez is the first of 2 officers charged in the shooting to face trial. The other charged is the school district's former police chief, Pete Arredondo, who was considered the commander at the scene. Prosecutors said Gonzalez delayed action during the crucial few minutes as the shooting began, waiting for backup and cover, when he should have been running toward the gunman and preventing the gunman from entering the school. Defense attorneys argued that Gonzalez took immediate action, pursuing a running figure he thought was the gunman, but who turned out to be a teacher. That pursuit put him on the opposite side of the building from the gunfire as it began, so he had no way to know where it was and no safe way to get to it, they argued. A dead police officer cannot save a child, defense attorney Jason Goss said during the trial. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, Mr. Trump and the Davos divide. He backtracked on using force on Greenland, but still embarrassed Europe. Those of a religious bent might accuse stereotypical Davos man, immense fortune, private jet, outrageous hypocrisy, spine-tingling propensity of the sin of pride, in which case President Trump's speech Wednesday to the World Economic Forum at Davos felt like a form of divine retribution. It was a wild day with Mr. Trump berating Europe, even as he said he won't invade Greenland after all. American allies and their many friends in the U.S. Congress have been reeling since Mr. Trump on Saturday threatened to impose tariffs on a handful of countries if they obstruct his effort to buy the Arctic island from Denmark. What a difference a market rout on Tuesday makes. U.S. stock indexes soared Wednesday on word that he won't invade, and they climbed again when several hours later Mr. Trump announced he won't impose the tariffs after he had reached a framework of a future deal on Greenland with the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. Details to come. Yet how embarrassing for Europe in particular. Mr. Trump pointed out that Denmark and other European allies would struggle to defend Greenland from the U.S. or anyone else. It's the United States alone that can protect this giant mass of land, this giant piece of ice, develop it and improve it, he said, which is true. This followed a long riff about Europe's many economic dysfunctions, especially on energy policy. He referred to the European Union's flagship Green New Deal climate policies as the Green New Scam, chastised Britain for failing to tap more North Sea oil, and mocked the catastrophic energy collapse which befell every European nation in recent years. Also, all true. Call it the Davos disconnect. The bien pensant political and business leaders who show up to these confabs espoused a liberal order of democracy and free markets. But they then rely on the U.S. to enforce their values around the world while also generating sufficient global prosperity to allow them to fund their growth-killing welfare states and climate pieties at the expense of their own militaries. As Mr. Trump reminded them, European leaders required sustained U.S. prodding before they ramped up defense spending to provide for their own security. They depend on the U.S. to lead them in supporting Ukraine as it fends off a Russian invasion that Europe was unable to deter or end. Mr. Trump harps to an unhelpful degree on this helplessness, and his insults and bullying threats over Greenland have alienated Europe to a needless extent. His Greenland threats also aren't playing well in Congress or with American voters. But the barbs hit hard among the Davos crowd because they know they depend on the U.S. more than they'd like, and they know it's their own fault. Yet even now that Mr. Trump is calling into question American support for allies, many of them assume the only alternative is to cozy up to China, at least economically. Witness Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, who won plaudits for his Davos speech Tuesday that mourned the end of the rules-based order and calling on middle powers such as Canada to form new realpolitik alliances to stand up to the great powers. In a world of great power rivalry, the countries in between have a choice: compete with each other for favor, or to combine to create a third path with impact, Mr. Carney said, days after he traveled to Beijing to compete for favor from the communist regime. Canada, with abundant natural resources, including oil, and a famously well-educated population, nonetheless has been a habitual defense spending laggard within NATO. It barely meets the 2% of GDP target. Middle power indeed. The hypocrisy would be amusing if the deepening rift between the U.S. and its allies weren't so dangerous. But China and Russia are watching. They see how easily Mr. Trump can be goaded into antagonizing staunch allies such as NATO partners, and how vulnerable those allies are. Our enemies would like nothing better than to see Greenland become the cause of a permanent Atlantic rift that blows up NATO. They also see how distractible all these parties are. As NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte warned Wednesday, the Greenland fiasco is diverting attention from the more urgent problem of Ukraine. The West needs statesmen who can settle the Greenland dispute in a way that enhances U.S. security and NATO. Let's hope Mr. Trump's framework begins to close the Davos divide. The Clintons, contempt, and Jeffrey Epstein. The House is playing politics, but a subpoena is a subpoena. The House Oversight Committee voted 34-8 on Wednesday to recommend that former President Bill Clinton be held in contempt of Congress after he declined to comply with a subpoena to testify on Jeffrey Epstein. A similar measure for Hillary Clinton passed 28-15. Next, the resolutions go to the full House, which could refer the pair to the Justice Department for prosecution. The Clintons have denied any knowledge of the dead sex offenders' crimes, and they argue that the House is doing partisan theatrics. Democrats point out that President Trump also socialized with Epstein, and they now accuse his administration of trying to cover up the government's unreleased investigatory files. None of this is a great use of Congress's time, since all it seems to do is feed internet conspiracies that Epstein is the key to everything. But a subpoena is still a subpoena, and Congress has a right to insist it not be ignored. Representative James Comer, the committee's chairman, said Tuesday that the Clintons had offered to speak only to him and the Democratic ranking member, and only if no transcript was recorded. He understandably rejected idea. Former President Clinton has a documented history of parsing language to evade questions, responded falsely under oath, and was impeached and suspended from the practice of law as a result, Mr. Comer said. The absence of an official transcript is an indefensible demand. The best scenario would be for the Clintons and the committee to come to some agreement, and then for them to grit their teeth and show up. Peter Navarro went to jail for contempt of Congress, and Mr. Trump probably wouldn't hesitate to return the favor. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages, is Trump trying to lose the midterms? He spent much of his first year back in office undermining his political interest, by Karl Rove. A year ago Tuesday, Donald Trump was sworn in for a second time as president. It's been a year of rapid movement, controversy, and upheaval. It's also been utterly mystifying. Why does the president keep doing things that are against his political self-interest? Why has he ignored the reality that the midterms will be decided not only by how much his base is energized, but by whether Republicans carry independents and soft partisans? Mr. Trump is missing chances to draw critical swing voters the GOP's way. He could be driving some to vote Democratic. On the lost opportunity front, look no further than the president's extraordinary achievement in securing the southern border. He stopped the flood of illegal migrants. He was right. We didn't need a new law, only a different president. Yet Mr. Trump didn't take a victory lap to subsidize the success. If he had gone to the border, Hispanic and Democratic local officials would have thanked him for removing the tremendous burden on their hospitals, food pantries, social services, and public safety. That image would have been powerful and lingered. Instead, the White House has turned a major win into a major drag on the president's approval. 58% of Americans and 66% of independents disapprove of Mr. Trump's handling of immigration in a January 12th CNN SRRS survey. The administration's pledge to focus on expelling violent criminal aliens, the worst of the worst, was widely popular. But Team Trump misplayed its hand by doing a good deal further, dispatching immigration and customs enforcement to Home Depots to grab day laborers or to other places where otherwise law-abiding illegal aliens congregate is unpopular. These expanded ICE sweeps are turning voters against Mr. Trump. In a January 12th Quinnipiac University poll, 57% of all voters and 64% of independents disapprove of how ICE is enforcing immigration laws. The Trump administration made the situation worse by describing Renee Good, the woman killed by an ICE agent earlier this month, as a domestic terrorist and fomenting further chaos in Minneapolis. In a January 12th CNN SRRS survey, 51% of Americans said ICE was making cities less safe. As puzzling as his mishandling of immigration is, Mr. Trump's insistence that for national security, Denmark must surrender Greenland. For weeks, he made it sound as though he might even invade, clarifying only on Wednesday morning that he won't go to war with a NATO ally. That he threatened so long to use force hasn't endeared him to voters. 86% of Americans oppose taking Greenland by force, including 68% of Republicans and 94% of independents, according to a January 12th Quinnipiac poll. And they're right, too. An invasion would destroy NATO and gravely damage American trade and political ties. Only China and Russia would have profited. What makes this still more confounding is that the U.S. already has a treaty allowing it to establish military bases in Greenland. Yet Mr. Trump has insisted America must own the land outright, which even without the possibility of war is a political loser. Quinnipiac found 55% of Americans oppose trying to buy Greenland, while 37% support it. That isn't even the most unhinged moment from the first year of Trump 2.0. Remember Liberation Day last April? He levied tariffs willy-nilly, even on places with which we have trade surpluses or no trade. For months, the president has attacked the Federal Reserve's independence to set interest rates, roiling markets. He pardoned all the criminals who assaulted Capitol Police on January 6, 2021. He called voters' affordability concerns a hoax, then moments later claimed he'd address them. Last Thursday, he accepted Venezuela's opposition leader, Maria Corina Machado's gift of her 2025 Nobel Peace Prize medal as if he had earned it. On Saturday, he announced a 10% tariff on imports from European countries that criticized his threats to invade Greenland and warned he'd raise it to 25% if the Danes didn't strike a deal by June 1st. On Tuesday, he suggested he'd send Americans $2,000 tariff rebate checks without congressional approval. And in a missive almost too over the top to believe, he recently tried to bully the Norwegian Prime Minister because the Norwegian Nobel Committee hadn't awarded him the Peace Prize. Because of the perceived slight, Mr. Trump wrote, I no longer feel an obligation to think purely of peace. The Trump presidency wasn't normal, even in his first term, but something is different now. Americans are increasingly unnerved by the president's rambling appearances and late-night screeds. Whether it's age or advisors who can't check his worst instincts, Mr. Trump is acting in ways no American president has. His downward spiral has led 58% of Americans and 66% of independents in the CNN SRRS poll to describe his second term as a failure. If his team can't turn things around, he'll help defeat his party this fall and damage the country for years. Mr. Trump isn't the only politician who doesn't seem to understand that swing voters will decide the midterms. Next week, I'll look at the Democrats. They aren't doing too well either. The Mississippi Marathon is teaching kids to read. By focusing on phonics, the state's public schools rocketed from 49th place in the nation to 9th. By Rahm Emanuel, Hattiesburg, Mississippi. Step into F.B. Woodley Elementary School, and you know immediately that you're entering an institution of educational excellence. This isn't some well-heeled suburban school serving privileged kids. It isn't nestled in a high-income gated community. This is an urban school in a majority black city set in the post-industrial Deep South. Felica Morris, who cut her teeth as a teacher and has since become the school's principal, doesn't suffer nonsense or accept failure. By setting an orderly but welcoming tone, she has helped Woodley's teachers drive reading and math results well above the state's fourth grade average. The average daily attendance rate is nearly 95%, all of which suggests something profound. The answer to America's core educational challenge is in Hattiesburg, not Harvard. Not many Democrats on the national stage visit Mississippi these days. The state hasn't gone blue in a presidential election since 1976. But I decided to trek down to learn more about what some are calling the Mississippi Miracle. I can report that everyone throughout the country, regardless of politics, should be paying much closer attention to the state's educational turnaround. I've long been puzzled as to why, at a moment when we've seen some of the worst nationwide test scores in 30 years, education debates rarely focus on basic academic excellence. The Magnolia State's reading scores haven't only bucked the national trend, they've been rising for years. Mississippi, once ranked 49th in fourth grade reading, it's now 9th. Yet the average fourth grader in Mississippi today outperforms the average fourth grade Californian. Half of black fourth graders read at grade level in Mississippi, while barely more than a quarter do in the Golden State. What is Mississippi's secret? The state leapfrogged California and my home state of Illinois, not by becoming wealthier or changing its demographics. It's actually very simple, and given that Louisiana, Tennessee, and Alabama have pursued similar paths, replicable. Mississippi chose to spend less time on topics that dominate Washington's education agenda and instead maintained a focus on what happens inside the classroom. It focused on the fundamentals. Mississippi didn't sprinkle fairy dust on its schools to improve them. It abandoned the hokum that convinced educators that they could teach kids to read through pictures and context clues rather than decoding words. The state restored phonics-based systems that rigorous scientific studies have shown to work. But more than that, with the help and support of former Netscape CEO Jim Barksdale, the Magnolia State constructed a system to train teachers so that they are effective at teaching students to read. It also imposed systems of accountability to ensure that administrators, teachers, and students alike meet their marks. As Mr. Barksdale said to me, Mississippi Miracle is a misnomer because it suggests that test scores improved overnight. What happened would better be understood as the Mississippi Marathon. But the state's success has proved uncomfortable for the right, which has largely abandoned the promise of public schooling in the belief that the whole enterprise should be sacrificed in favor of vouchers. And it has proved uncomfortable for the left, which has surrendered to what President George W. Bush called the soft bigotry of low expectations. It stopped holding schools accountable on the presupposition that there is no real way for educators to lift children living in poor, crime-ridden, drug-laden neighborhoods. Rather than discarding public schools or educator accountability, the rest of America should adopt a model that has been proven to work. To paraphrase the 1992 Clinton presidential campaign, it's the fundamentals, stupid. But those aren't our focus. On television, on social media, even at conferences of education policymakers, we're distracted too often by debates about pronouns, funding formulas, school names, and governing structures. Let's focus on what's happening inside the classroom. We know how to make our education system world-class again. The question is whether we have the strength and guts to do for our kids what our parents, teachers, principals, and coaches did for us. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the January 22nd, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. Your reader has been Corrine. Thank you for listening.